Mayor Eric Garcetti is calling to raise the minimum wage for all workers in Los Angeles. The proposal would gradually raise the minimum wage from its current $9 to $13 an hour and 25 cents by 2017.
Valley View reporter Lauren Llanos is in Studio B with CSUN economics professor Glenn Whitman.
Thank you, and we are here with Professor of Economics here at Cal State Northridge, Mr. Glenn Whitman. Glenn, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's great to be here.
So we just have a few questions today. So as we know, there are strong advocates on both sides of the argument on raising the minimum wage. What would you say the argument is in favor of raising the minimum wage?
Well, I think the argument in favor is pretty much the obvious one. We know that there are people working at the minimum wage who could use more income, some of them living under the poverty line. So raising their wage would seem like a good idea for those people.
And then what is the argument against raising the minimum wage?
Well, the conventional wisdom in economics is that when you raise the price of something, people buy less of it. Or in this case, if you raise the price of labor, employers are going to buy less of it. They're going to hire fewer of those workers. So you end up with a kind of trade-off. Yes, some people keep their jobs and they end up getting higher wages, but at the same time, we expect that at least some people are either going to lose their jobs or more likely just never get them in the first place because employers don't hire them as quickly.
There are some arguments for raising it as far as people earning more money, being able to spend more money in the economy. Now, in terms of historical perspective, has history taught us anything in terms of raising the minimum wage as helping the economy?
Well, there have been many studies, almost too many to count. And some of them, in fact, I would say the majority of them have in fact confirmed the conventional wisdom, which is that you're going to have some reduction in employment among low-skilled workers. There have been some studies, I'd say the minority, but still a significant number, which have either failed to show a significant effect on the number of workers employed, or that have even shown potentially a positive effect. So raise the wage and oddly enough, you get more workers employed. But I think if you look at them on the whole, in general, what you're going to come away with is the conclusion that there is in fact a trade-off. Now, is it a trade-off worth making? That's something that's harder to say. It involves some value judgments. Do you think it's more important to be able to offer some of those people a higher wage, and are you willing to deal with the cost of the fact that some of those people won't be getting jobs? And the real downside there is the fact that to the extent that people are not able to get jobs as a result of a higher minimum wage, we expect that probably those will be the most disadvantaged people, the ones with the least experience, the least education, and those may be the people that we're cutting off the bottom rung of the ladder for. In terms of how it affects the wider economy, for instance, do people spend a whole lot more money and that leads to better macroeconomic effects? No, it's going to be extremely minimal, and I think this is something that economists largely agree on. When we talk about people who are working at the minimum wage, we're talking about people who constitute only about 2.5% of the entire workforce, and an even smaller percentage of the total population. The increased spending by those people is unlikely to have any major macroeconomic effects, especially once you consider that the money had to come from somewhere, so that means that there are other people, such as the owners and managers of these businesses, who may be making less money. So overall, we would expect probably not much effect one way or the other in terms of macroeconomic effects.
And would you say it might bridge the gap between the immense wealth disparity that we have specifically, well, in this country, but also in this state?
It's also just going to be drops in the bucket. We're going to see very minimal impact there, especially since if what you're interested in is the disparity between households, the truth is the minimum wage is not very well targeted at the very poorest households. As it happens, only about maybe 1 in 5 workers working at the minimum wage is actually in a household that is below the poverty line. Others of them may be in households where there are other wage earners who are not even working at the minimum wage, or who are working at the minimum wage, but together they're making a reasonable income for the household. So the result is that in terms of reduction of poverty or reduction of the disparity between the rich and the poor, again, we don't expect it to have a whole lot of effect. To a great extent, what we're talking about with the minimum wage is a symbolic issue for that reason.
And how does our already struggling economy in Los Angeles play as a factor in this debate? Or is it a factor?
I don't see it being a huge factor. One way that it does play in is the question of whether you would expect those disemployment effects, to the extent that they occur, to be muted or amplified. So if we have a growing economy at the moment, and the truth is we do have a growing economy, it's just not growing as quickly as we would like. But to that extent, it may cover up some of the disemployment effect. On the other hand, if the economy is shrinking or not growing, in a case like that, you would expect to see the effects of the minimum wage more clearly.
All right, well, thank you so much for being with us again today. And back to you in the studio.